At some point in your life, someone worried about you. Maybe it was a parent who pulled you aside and said you needed to get out more. Maybe it was a school counselor who used the word withdrawn on a form you weren't supposed to see. Maybe it was a friend who kept showing up with plans because they genuinely believed that if they just gave you enough reasons to leave the house, you'd eventually stop wanting to stay in it. And maybe, for a long time, some part of you believed them. You learned to perform the answer, to say, yeah, I had a great weekend, instead of explaining that your weekend was mostly silence, and the silence was exactly what you needed. You learned to laugh when someone called you antisocial, even when the word sat wrong. You learned to frame it as a flaw you were working on. This video is about what they got wrong. Picture this. It's Saturday afternoon. No plans, no obligations. The apartment is yours. Most people in that situation feel one of two things: relief or dread. For a certain kind of person, what they feel is something else entirely. Something that's harder to name. A kind of settling. Like the nervous system finally getting permission to exhale. Not the relief of escaping something bad. The satisfaction of arriving somewhere good. You make coffee, you sit, maybe you read, maybe you just think about something you heard last week, a problem you've been turning over, an idea that keeps showing up at the edges of other thoughts. Nobody interrupts. Hours pass the way they do when you're actually present inside them. Then Sunday night comes, and you realize you didn't miss anyone. You weren't waiting for Monday. You weren't lonely. You were home. Here's where it gets strange. Because the rest of the country right now is in the middle of what the U.S. Surgeon General formally declared a loneliness epidemic. In 2024, the American Psychiatric Association surveyed over 2,000 adults and found that nearly 1 in 3 Americans feels lonely every single week. Researchers are describing it as a public health crisis, comparable in its effects on the body to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And then there's you, spending entire weekends alone, genuinely fine. From the outside, those two things look like they should be the same. Being alone, feeling lonely, they seem like they'd travel together. But they don't. And the reason they don't tells you something important about how your mind actually works, something that most people who've worried about you never stop to consider. Loneliness isn't about how much time you spend alone. It's about the gap between the connection you want and the connection you have. You don't have that gap, not because you've given up on people, but because your inner life fills it before it can form. Psychologists who study solitude have started drawing a distinction that changes everything. The difference between solitude-seeking and social avoidance. They look identical from the outside. Someone alone, not calling anyone, not going out. But the internal experience is completely different, and so are the outcomes. Research published in the Journal of Personality in 2024 found that the strongest predictors of genuinely positive solitude weren't introversion itself, but 3 specific traits: curiosity, self-reflection, and what researchers call self-congruence. Basically, living in a way that actually matches who you are. People with these qualities don't just tolerate being alone, they use it. The time alone isn't empty. It's productive in ways that don't produce anything you can photograph. And part of the reason comes down to what your brain is actually doing when nothing external is happening. Neuroscientists call it the default mode network, the system of brain regions that activates specifically when you're not focused on the outside world. For a long time, researchers assumed this network was just the brain idling. Doing nothing. They were wrong. The default mode network is where your brain processes meaning, consolidates memory, generates original ideas by connecting things that normally live in separate mental rooms. A 2024 study out of Baylor College of Medicine demonstrated this by using direct electrical stimulation to disrupt the default mode network during creative tasks, and found that doing so immediately reduced the originality of people's thinking. The network isn't passive. It's doing your most important cognitive work, quietly, while the rest of you sits still. For some people, that network runs hot. It's active, engaged, generating. And when you give it uninterrupted time, no competing conversations, no social monitoring, no managing other people's emotional states, it does what it does best. This is why you've never actually been bored. Not because boredom doesn't exist, but because boredom requires a gap between what your mind is doing and what it wants to be doing. Your mind is always doing something. The gap never opens. But here's the part worth sitting with, because this is where it gets uncomfortable. Not everyone who prefers being alone is drawing from a full well. The same researchers who identified the benefits of positive solitude were careful about something: the difference between choosing solitude and retreating into it, between using alone time to restore yourself and using it to avoid something that's starting to scare you, between a full inner life and a very convincing story about having one. Some people are genuinely self-sufficient. Their minds are rich, active, self-sustaining. They choose solitude the way you choose a good meal, because it nourishes them, not because they've forgotten how to eat anything else. Other people have been hurt enough times that closeness started to feel like a liability. And solitude, quiet, controllable, a predictable solitude, became a place to hide. Not a room they built, but a room they retreated to. And over time, it started to feel like home, even if it wasn't. The question isn't whether you enjoy being alone. The question is whether you still let people in when it counts. Whether there are one or two people who know the version of you that exists when no performance is required. Whether your solitude is something you return from or something you've disappeared into. Both look the same on a Saturday afternoon. Only you know which one it is. There's a certain kind of person who ends up watching something like this. Not someone who's sad about being alone. Someone who's been made to feel like they should be. Someone who has spent years fielding variations of the same gentle concern. From people who love them, who can't quite understand why the weekend plans keep getting declined, why the phone goes quiet, why the person they care about seems so content in a situation that would make most people unravel. If that's you, the worry they had about you wasn't wrong to exist. It came from love, but it was based on the assumption that what you were experiencing was a deficit, an absence of something you needed and couldn't get. It wasn't. It was the presence of something most people spend their whole lives looking for outside themselves. A mind that's good company. That's not nothing. That's not a consolation prize. For the people who have it, it's one of the quietest and most durable forms of peace there is. You don't need to explain it to everyone. You don't need to perform extroversion to prove you're okay. It already is enough. And the people worth keeping, the ones worth letting past the door of that quiet life, will be the ones who never asked you to prove it in the first place.